Middleton guarded by Butler down there. Dudley up top. O'Bannett's got a clean catch. Oh! Milwaukee wins it! And Jared Bayless sprung free under the basket.
Dunleavy in for Jennings. Three. It's good! Brandon Jennings! Brandon Jennings on opening night of three with 7/10 on the inbound play. They'll go home happy in Milwaukee tonight.
Thomas backs him down. Giannis into the lane. Giannis spinning, fading shot up. Good for Giannis at the buzzer. Bucks win it at the Garden.
Heyo, Bucks fans, what's going on? Welcome to the Bucks Trilogy podcast presented by the Wisconsin Sports Trilogy. And I'm not really sure where to go from here because I'm not used to doing this intro. We have our Bucks Trilogy podcast coming back. Scott currently is waiting for a new computer to come to him. But we wanted to get out a podcast since we're finally kind of back in the groove of the Bucks podcast thing. So we wanted to get one out, just Tyler and I, and we are going to talk a little bit about that fifth starter spot. So obviously, we know Giannis, Chris Middleton, Jrue Holiday, Brook Lopez, they're going to be in that starting five, right? So we're going to look at that fifth spot, which theoretically should be a two-guard spot, but we'll kind of talk about that and what our thoughts are, what is the best option in that spot for the Bucks. Before we get to that, Tyler, how are you doing?
I am doing good. This is really strange. I don't think we've ever done a Bucks podcast without Scott before, so it's kind of like the big buck left us, and now it's the two little Bambis trying to walk on their own. So we'll see how this goes. And also, I'm really excited Scott's getting a new laptop because he has struggled with that one for, I don't know, probably since we started this. So if he wants to buy me a new one too, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, and for listeners that don't know, struggle with that laptop is a massive understatement for Scott. There's been times where we've planned on recording and we've had to wait literal hours for his laptop to start working. And I'm very glad that Scott's going to have a laptop that we can trust. Sounds like he didn't cheap out on it, which is probably a good thing. So hopefully he's going to be back and consistent with his new laptop. And that laptop, I was on it one time. We couldn't even load a Word document. It was terrible. So I am glad to hopefully get that back with Scott and we can start getting more consistent podcasts out for you guys. But like I said, we're going to talk starting lineup. I mentioned the other four positions are pretty well set in stone, right, for the Milwaukee Bucks. And let's talk about that final starter spot. So Tyler, you kind of came up with this idea for this podcast. So what are you looking at? Who is that potential fifth starter that you would like to see in this starting lineup?
Well, I told you before we started recording, I wanted to do this because I myself am still not really sure. I'm sure as the season goes along, there's always injuries and Bud likes to be cautious with players. Like he's going to rest guys. Like it's going to change a lot, but you could very easily point to last year, Wes Matthews was that fifth starter. So who is that going to be in 2021, which is essentially what we're looking at. So we're going to run through pretty much all the options here. And you mentioned, hey, it's most likely going to be a guard. And then we're going to start with Torrey Craig, who is labeled as a small forward. So we're going to do that in honor of Big Buck Vanilla Gorilla, who is not with us, because that's who he believes should be the fifth starter. And his reasonings, if you listen to our last podcast, was mainly for that defensive prowess that he has. He started games for the Nuggets last year. Looking at his stats here, he started 27 of them in 2019, 37 games he started in 2018. And really, he's just kind of he's not going to be a high volume shooter or scorer with a starting lineup. He's just going to go out there and guard probably one of their tougher assignments, which makes it easier on your starters to begin the game. So I think that was Scott's big reasoning. Do you have anything to add to that, or what are your thoughts on Craig?
So a lot of the same reasonings for me. Torrey Craig is the guy that I want to see in. Really, it's going to be probably the shooting guard role when you line it up, but he's going to be able to do a lot of different things for this Bucks team, especially in the defensive end. You talked about his defense. It's very, very good. You look at some of his on-ball numbers against very good players. In the regular season in 2020, well, the 1920 season, Torrey Craig was able to lock down a lot of different guys. He went up against guys like Devin Booker, who went 1 for 8 against him, LeBron James, 4 of 15, James Harden, 2 of 19, and Donovan Mitchell, who shot 5 of 20 against him. He's a tough guy to score on, and he'll replace Wes Matthews in that role, right? They seem like very similar defenders, except the only thing that's different is Torrey Craig is long enough and big enough to defend multiple positions on the court. You know, Wes Matthews could probably defend 1 through 3, and if they had a small 4 on the court, maybe he could defend the power forward position too. But most of the time, 1 through 3. You look at the versatility from Torrey Craig. I'm looking at an article on Forbes Sports from actually one of my co-editors at Dairyland Express, Brian Sampson. He looked at his versatility. He spent 60.6% of his defensive possessions defending guards, 34.4% on forwards, and he did have 5% on centers. So he can legitimately defend 4 positions and maybe even 5. Like, he has defended centers last year, and that's probably more when they're going small ball, things like that. He probably can't defend the Joel Embiids of the world, but he can defend when they go small ball on the other side. He can defend the 5. It depends who else is on the court with him. You know, if Brook Lopez is on the court, maybe that's not the best idea. But if you're going small ball to match them, he can be your small ball 5, at least defensively. And that's something that's interesting. If their 5 is good, you can put Torrey Craig on him. Otherwise, you put Giannis on him and put Torrey Craig on the best offensive player on the court. And that's something that's going to help Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, potentially that could help him, you know, play the off guard rather than the more talented guard on the other team. You know, there's a lot of different ways that this can help this Milwaukee Bucks starting lineup. And like I said, one of them is Chris Middleton. I think the other one, it's going to make this defense better overall, because you can just put Torrey Craig on anyone and have Giannis at guarding one of their less talented players, and he's that rover still, and you still have to go by Brook Lopez. Like, Scott and I talked about that in our last podcast of that's going to be scary. If you get past Torrey Craig, first off, then you have to deal with the likes of Giannis Antetokounmpo and Brook Lopez, which good luck in the paint against those guys. Other than that, a few other things I want to mention. Very limited offensively. You know, he did hit in 18 and 19. He connected on 36% of corner threes. So if he's able to do that and just sit in the corner, you know, that would be fine. He's not going to do much off the bounce or anything like that. But if he can hit the occasional spot up corner 3, and he might get a lot of them in this Bucks offense, if he's hitting 35 to 38% of them, that's going to be a win. And with the rest of the firepower on the starting lineup, I think that would be more than fine. The other thing I want to talk about is offensive rebounding. According to Cleaning the Glass, he grabbed at least 5.7% of his team's misses in each of the last 3 seasons, which ranks in the 97th percentile for wings in the NBA. So the Bucks don't really get offensive boards that often, but that could change. Extra possessions for this offense could be huge, definitely in the postseason. So that's another thing that makes me just like, okay, I think Torrey Craig makes a lot of sense. Let's have that bench unit. Maybe they're not going to be very good defensively, but they're going to be able to shoot and score the ball. And again, which I think is a big thing, is allowing Torrey Craig to take the bulk of the defensive assignments, or the toughest ones, and allow your other offensive guys in that starting lineup to be able to not be constantly defending the Kawhi Leonards, the Kevin Durant, all of those types of players. So I think that will definitely help this Bucks team. And to me, it makes the most sense to have Torrey Craig in that starting lineup.
Yeah, with putting Craig in the lineup, you obviously have a very strong defensive starting five, which is good. In theory, that should really help out Chris Middleton a lot, especially offensively, because he most likely would get the least challenging assignment defensively out of Jrue Holiday, Torrey Craig, and then himself. The problem I think I see, though, or the counter, I guess, it's not really a problem, is, okay, now what does your bench look like? Who's going to be that leader defensively? You might have Dante, depending how the lineup shakes out. He likes to gamble, though. He's not like he's necessarily a lockdown guy you want on some of the more elite scorers in the NBA. So if you leave Craig and have him come off the bench, now let's say Jrue Holiday gets a break kind of halfway in the first quarter. Let's say you're playing a Rockets team. They elect to leave James Harden in throughout the entire first quarter. Now you got Torrey Craig coming in to guard a tired James Harden, which I think will take the advantage on Craig there. And that really helps your second team out a lot more from a defensive standpoint. So you have Craig out there, and if Dante is coming off the bench, those two they should be able to work really well together. I mean, you got the sound guy and then you got the gambler, which could make that bench unit even stronger, I think. So I'm kind of making a case here that Craig should come off the bench because it helps out defensively a ton. If you leave him in the starting lineup, you have Jrue Holiday, who's arguably a better defender than Bledsoe was, and Craig out there. One of those guys isn't getting maximal opportunities to express their talents out there, at least defensively anyway. If you split them up, then I think you do. So that's kind of my counter to having him come off the bench.
Yeah, and I think no matter where he is, whether he's in the starting rotation or he's coming off the bench, it's going to help that unit tremendously. And just because he's not starting doesn't mean that he's not going to be in at the end of games shutting down players, right? Just because you start doesn't mean you're the finisher. We saw that at least last season with the dynamic at point guard between George Hill and Eric Bledsoe, right? It was always Bledsoe starting games, but when you went back and looked at it, it really seemed like, no, this is, when it comes down to it, it's George Hill. And that might be what happens with Torrey Craig. I mentioned, that if Torrey Craig is in that starting rotation, it kind of really limits the bench unit, I think, defensively. They're not going to have a lot of those big-time kind of defensive players. So it's definitely something to think about. That could be something that we look back and say, okay, maybe we should think about keeping a little bit more defensive-minded guy on for the second unit. But the other thing that I do want to throw out there, Tyler, is a guy that can help defensively is Bobby Portis coming off the bench. I think he's going to be another guy that he hasn't had incredible defensive numbers, I don't think, throughout his career. But if you look on Basketball Reference, their advanced stats, they have offensive win shares and defensive win shares. That's a number that's kind of accumulated throughout their season, or throughout their career, Every season they get an estimate. Basically, offensive win shares is an estimate of the number of wins contributed by a player due to his offense. Defensive win shares, exact same thing, but by their defense. So again, that's accumulated. You get one in, say, the 2018-2019 season, and you get two in 2019-2020, you would be at 3 for your career. So for Bobby Portis, his offensive win shares is at 4.8. His defensive win shares is at 6.1. So he has been a little bit more efficient in terms of his defensive win shares. That's kind of how he's helping his teams win. But then you go back and look, it's not like he's a slouch offensively. He can still, last year he averaged 10.1. Over his career, he's averaged 10.2 points per game. Field goal shooting, 45%, 3-point, basically 36% throughout his career. Free throw percentage about 75%. So he's definitely no slouch offensively, but he also brings that aspect defensively. So if you have that coming off the bench, you have DJ Augustine, who isn't spectacular, but can be, I think Scott used pesky or something in our last podcast for opposing players. I think that does bring a little bit of aspect of that defensive-minded players. And then also you throw Dante DiVincenzo in there, who's just going to be working hard and doing the best he can to do everything he can to allow the Bucks to win. So I do think there is still some defense on that second unit, and I just think I would take the benefit of helping Chris Middleton and the starters defensively, allowing them to be a little bit more offensive focused than helping that defense or that second unit group.
Yeah, those are good points. I think that's very surprising about Portis's defense, because I feel like that's one of the bigger knocks on his game. I've been looking at like some other articles on him there, and it says like defensively he drove fans crazy just for kind of like camping out on the perimeter, like if he's guarding someone who can shoot. So like help defense could be a little bit of an issue, but pesky players, I'll take a pesky player. Like I like that a little bit. For me, we talked a lot about defense and kind of how it impacts like this starting five and then the backup unit. But like, let's shift over to like who can help maximize us offensively. And I think that's Bryn Forbes if we put him in the starting lineup. I mean, the dude can shoot. He shot 38% from three last year, 42% in 2018, and he attempted over 5 threes a game in both of those seasons. He has experience started 81 of 82 games for the Spurs in 2018, started 62 games in 2019 for the Spurs there. I mean, it's simple. Like, you want to put Giannis with as many shooters as possible. And if he's getting exposed defensively early on in the game, then boom, bring in Craig, or bring in somebody else to fill that role. It's not like I'm expecting Bryn Forbes to get anywhere near like 30 minutes a game. It'll probably be around 20 would be my guess, but space the court out, give him another outlet for Giannis there. I think Bryn Forbes really fills that role and would be a very good option for the fifth starter.
Yeah, so the Torrey Craig versus Bryn Forbes argument is polar opposites, right? So Bryn Forbes is going to help the offense tremendously. It's going to space the court. It's going to help everyone offensively because he is a knockdown shooter and he's a high volume knockdown shooter. Career 40% from three. Like Tyler said, very good since he's really been starting a lot of games in 2018, 2019, and into last season. He's kept that 3-point percentage up, and he's done a very good job with that. So it's definitely an exciting combination of, having those four guys out there that we were talking about, and then throwing out Bryn Forbes where he can create some space and really help Giannis, Chris Middleton, everyone offensively. But now the flip side of that is defensively, Chris Middleton, Jrue Holiday, Giannis are all going to have to work a lot harder on that end of the floor, just because you're probably going to put Bryn Forbes on, the off-ball guard that isn't, very well, not saying they're not very talented, because NBA players, especially starting lineup NBA players, are very talented, but you're going to put him on the lesser of the guards. Hopefully the guard that is the off-ball guard, not the point guard who they're running the offense through. That's going to put more pressure on Jrue Holiday, Chris Middleton. You're not going to have a guy outside of Chris Middleton to really guard the wings, which there's a lot of very, very talented offensive wings in this league. And night in and night out, that's kind of the position that you have to be able to defend, because that's where all the stars are, right? LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, you have all of these positions. So that's going to definitely stress the defense quite a bit. So to me, it's a lot of what would you prefer? Would you prefer a little bit more offense with the starting lineup and have that defense have a little bit more defensive grittiness to them? Or would you rather have that defensive prowess in that starting lineup with more your sharpshooters and all offensive minded type of players in that bench group? To me, it's a lot of personal preference and what Mike Budenholzer prefers, because I do think there are two probably pretty good options. I would just prefer my offensive stars to lead in that role. And I think that makes Torrey Craig a little bit better option for me. But I would understand a Bryn Forbes making the offense a lot easier for the rest of the four out there. I just think Torrey Craig helps a little bit more, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally get that. And having Forbes in there certainly would make Middleton's game a little bit harder, but like I'm okay with that putting more defensive pressure on Jrue Holiday. Like you mentioned the stars at forward in position. Well, there's a hell of a lot of them at point guard as well. So, like in theory, Jrue Holiday's our third option offensively. So give him a little bit more defensively to take some responsibility there. And Chris Middleton can kind of pick and choose at moments in games when he wants to kind of take over, just like Giannis does there as well. The problem, I think, though, with Forbes, though, if he would come off the bench, like I just can't see him fitting in well with a rotation of like Dante, Pat, DJ Augustine. Like obviously, hopefully not all three of those guys plus Forbes are on the court at once. That just doesn't make much sense. But still putting all those in there, like I don't know where Forbes fits in well. It just doesn't seem like a solid rotation that I would want, because who is your defender then if Craig's starting, kind of like I mentioned earlier? Sorry to backtrack to that, but I feel like Forbes' value would be maximized most in the starting lineup. So I get it's kind of up to preference, and Budenholzer's a defensive-minded coach, like you said. So it'll be really interesting to see which direction he goes. I think we can kind of both agree, though. Is there any chance DJ Augustine is in the starting lineup, or are we just going to put the kibosh on that right away?
No, I think DJ Augustine's a fine player, but I think his role on this team is definitely backup point guard. You need a guy in there in that second unit that can run the offense. He is that guy. To me, it does not make any sense whatsoever to bring him in as a two guard in the starting lineup. He's going to be the backup point guard, and I think that's pretty obvious from anyone watching. I think the two guys we mentioned probably make the most sense for that potential fifth starter. If I had to put a dark horse on it, my dark horse candidate would probably be Dante DiVincenzo. So to me, he's kind of the in-between. He's not the sharpshooter that Bryn Forbes is, but he's got a little bit more offensive value than Torrey Craig. But again, he's better than Bryn Forbes defensively, but he is no Torrey Craig on the defensive side of the ball. So he's kind of that in between. So I would kind of get it if Budenholzer was just like, okay, we want defense on the second unit and we want shooting on the second unit. So they're going to put Craig and Forbes there. Dante DiVincenzo seems like the next best option to me. Even though it's not an option I would prefer. I'd prefer Torrey Craig over him and probably Bryn Forbes over him, but he is a guy that is a little bit more pesky defensively. He is a guy that can shoot the ball. He's got to be better. He's got to take a step this year. His first 2 years, I think, have been pretty disappointing in three-point shooting, so he's got to take a big step forward if he wants a true role on this team. And if he can do that, I think he could force his way into that starting rotation later on in the year. But I think to start, it's got to be between Craig and Forbes.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think Dante gets the nod for the fifth starter, despite being a Buck for his third year he'll be entering now. I'm glad you mentioned the three-point shooting. Like, I don't know, would him being in the starting five help, like, unlock his shooting ability? Like, he shot 33% last year, which isn't terrible, but it could be better, right? But he's going to be like a catch and shoot primarily type of role if he was in that starting five. We obviously know he can drive to the hoop. His finishing ability is a little bit to be desired yet. So, like, if you leave Dante on the bench, are his numbers going to improve at all, or are they going to stay pretty much what they were last year? I mean, I feel like he could always take a step forward, but like, am I expecting a like continual linear progression with Dante? No, I think maybe he'll get a little bit better statistically than he was last year, even if he's in the starting five. But I think the player we saw last year might be around what we're going to get out of him.
Yeah, and the thing is I think if he is able to figure out the shooting and consistently be in that 35 to 38% from three, it changes what he brings to the team. Because last year he was 33.6, which was a big step up from his rookie year where he shot 26.5%. But he's still a career average as of right now, just under 32%. So that's something that needs to get better. And if it does, like I said, if it's closer to 35, 36, 37%, that changes what he brings to the team. That forces guys to close out a little bit harder on him, all those types of things. So that's something that I'm looking for him to improve on, is definitely his shooting ability, because that can change what he brings and how good he could be for this team. So that's definitely something I'm monitoring. And you look back, at Nova in college, his 2016, 2017 and 2017, 2018 numbers from three, pretty good. 36.5% 2016, 2017, and bumped up in 2018 to 40%. His freshman year, he didn't get a lot of time and he didn't shoot the ball well, but he shot the ball well the last 2 years there. And that's something that we need to see him get back to. And that's something that I'm looking for from Dante DiVincenzo. And like I said, if he does it, that could mean that we actually start to see him maybe make a push to that starting rotation.
Right. And like, he didn't start in Villanova, and if he would start this year, like, he's not going to be like a playmaker, but I feel like on the second team, that's kind of what it's going to be asked of him. So like, statistically, that could really impact him a lot depending upon what his role is, which may impact our thoughts on him as well.
True. And one more thing on Dante. We talked about him kind of being a pesky defender. His rookie year, his offensive win shares was exactly 0. Defensive win shares was 0.6. Didn't get a lot of minutes played. He more than tripled his minutes played from last season from his rookie year. So definitely got more playing time, and he increased his win shares. So offensively, he bumped it up to 1, but defensively, 3.2. So that's a nice little jump there. And 3.2 for defensive win shares is legit in a season. So if he can continue to be that pesky guy where, he was averaging 2.6 steals a game. If he continues on that trend, he can be very, very effective in whatever unit he is in defensively. So if he continues to be that pesky defender, that's something that could be interesting to monitor with him, so long as we get that 3-point shooting percentage up just a bit.
Yeah, I agree. And like, kind of in the same boat as Dante is also former Buck and current Buck Pat Connaughton, who could be in the contention for sorry, I don't know why I stumbled over that. I was like, we re-signed him. I don't know. Whatever. See, this is why we need Scott. But Pat kind of struggles a little bit with that three-pointer as well. Usually career 34%. I mean, defensively, I think he brings less to the table than Dante. I mean, Pat's usually got those chase behind blocks. He's super athletic and has a great vertical, but like lateral quickness, shutdown defender are not terms I use with Pat Connaughton whatsoever. So I don't know. Do you think he stands a chance of being that fifth starter or no?
No, I don't think so. I think Pat's mostly a bench guy. He's another one that we need to see shoot better. His 2 seasons in Milwaukee, he's right at like 33% for his 3-point percentage. Again, that's a number we need to see higher. 2016, 2017 for Portland, he didn't shoot, well, he shot 3.8 3-pointers a game, and he shot 51.5% from three. Obviously, that's not sustainable, but then the next year he shoots 35% from three. We need 35% or above from Pat Connaughton to be effective. And you mentioned him defensively. Mainly his big defenses, those come from behind blocks, like you mentioned. Other than that, I do not see a lot from him defensively. And if we're looking at defensive win shares again, Basketball Reference likes Dante DiVincenzo over him. So that's something that shouldn't really surprise anyone that's watched these two players play. And the crazy thing is Pat's been in the league, since the 2015-2016 season. He has a 5.6 defensive win shares over his career. If you look at Bryn Forbes, who actually has been in the league a year less, is not all that. He's like 2 points behind that, which is kind of crazy to think about. If they were played for the same amount of time, I think it would be like 1 is the difference in their defensive win shares, which says a lot, I think, about Pat Connaughton, that he is not that defensive guy, other than kind of those energy type of plays where, he gets burnt and now he's got to make the play, because that's what happens when Pat makes those big plays. Unless it's jumping at a 3-point shooter, which works like 10% of the time he gets the block. The other 10% of the time it's an easy 2 points or an easy 3 points, depending on what the shooter does. So definitely not worth the block in that situation. So he's a guy that I anticipate, just like DJ Augustin, being on the bench. Again, I probably anticipate Dante being on the bench as well. So we'll have to see what happens moving forward. But do you have anything else, Tyler? Any more final arguments for Bryn Forbes over Torrey Craig?
I think we outlined them pretty well. I think those are the two clear candidates. For the rest of the guys don't make much sense. Unless if you want to go big and put like DJ Wilson or Bobby Portis in the starting lineup. That could be fun.
No, that would not be fun. I disagree with that.
I bet you we see it a couple times, not starting, but we'll see that rotation out there with Giannis, Brook, and then either DJ or Bobby Portis out there. We'll see that at least a few times throughout the year, but starting lineup wise, I don't want to see it.
Yeah, not a fan.
Yeah, otherwise I don't really have a whole lot. I mean, Bucks basketball is right around the corner. I'm excited for it to start. It's good to kind of theorize what some starting lineups and rotations might look like. I don't think the Bucks will reveal much in the preseason once that finally gets started. So I'm ready to get this regular season cooking and talk some Bucks basketball more consistently here.
Yeah, I'm excited for that too. I'm excited to not do these ourselves because Scott knows the Bucks a lot better than we do. I will be excited to have him back. I think he definitely brings a knowledge to this team that we don't have, but we can have the opinions. He has the knowledge and he can tell us when we're stupid or not. So it'll be good to have Scott back. Oh no, I think that's going to be it for us this week. Guys, make sure you're checking out the rest of our content. The best way to do that is follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter @Trilogy_pod. Subscribe on YouTube, the Wisconsin Sports Trilogy podcast there. Sounds like we're going to be starting a new series on YouTube for the Bucks. So be on the lookout for that. But until next time, fear the deer.
Fear the deer.